Our next speaker is familiar to many of you as our former state representative for Legislative District 1 here in Yavapai County, David Stringer. Mr. Stringer was first elected to the Arizona legislature in 2016, and he was reelected in 2018 as the second highest vote getter in the state that year for any elected office in the legislature. Now, as many of you know, Mr. Stringer was unable to finish his second term for reasons which he's planning on addressing in his remarks this afternoon. Mr. Stringer is a local attorney, still an active attorney here in Arizona. He's an attorney here in Prescott, and he's the owner and publisher of Prescott News, one of the sponsors of this event. And we thank him for his generosity and for his courage in standing with us and not being cowed like so many others into running night. As to the negative coverage of the event in the mainstream media, well, we would like to thank Mr. Stringer and Prescott News for boldly standing with us and standing up against this. As an elected official, Mr. Stringer's politics were decisively conservative with top ratings from most conservative groups such as the Free Enterprise Club, Americans for Prosperity, the Center for Arizona Policy, and the Arizona Republican Assembly. Mr. Stringer remains active in Republican politics as an elected precinct committeeman and state committeeman for Legislative District 1 here in Yavapai County. And please welcome me in joining him. And welcome him.
Christopher, thank you very much for that generous introduction. I'll try to live up to that. First, good afternoon. My name is David Stringer, and thanks so much for having me. I want to thank the board, and I want to thank College Republicans United for adding me to the list of speakers today. As you know, there were a lot of people that did not want to have this event here in Prescott this afternoon. They worked very hard to stop you, to prevent this from happening. So thanks to the courage and the perseverance of College Republicans United, their board, and the chapters, and all of you who showed up today, that we're able to go forward. I think that's a tremendous accomplishment considering the force of the opposition to what we're doing here today. This, to me, is a celebration of free speech. You're going to hear speakers today. I may be one of them who you don't agree with. I may say some things that make you kind of squirm in your seat. That's okay. I think it's all part of healthy debate. So you don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with any of the speakers, but we all have a right to be heard under our First Amendment. And we have as much right to gather here in this room as those demonstrators who are out on Highway 89 demonstrating against you and who would like to shut you down. But we're standing here for free speech. I'm very proud to be here. I'm also very proud that Prescott News, which is a small publishing company that I own here in Prescott, Arizona, is able to be one of the sponsors. I know we were criticized by that. We were castigated in some of the other media as being some kind of a right-wing organization. But we decided to help sponsor this event because we believe we're in the free speech business. We're in the business of publication. And, if we can't stand up for free speech as a digital publication, as a news source in this community, then we might as well give up. So we decided to go ahead and offer some financial support to producing this event and to provide some video services. So everything is going to be preserved on tape, and that's really important because when we have an event like this and people like me, like John, they come up here, they offer remarks. They may get misreported, misinterpreted in the media, but I want everybody to know, including them, we have a record of everything that is being said here this afternoon. So there's no question about what any speaker says. There's no way anything can be distorted or misrepresented. I want to say that when I first got into politics, I was retired. I was actually already retired from my career. And this is important for some of the younger people in the room. It's really because there's so much vitriol, so much viciousness, so much hate, so much politics of personal destruction. We need to be very cognizant, especially the younger people, of the price that they're going to have to pay to attend events like this, to stand up and speak for what they believe in. I had a career back in Washington, D.C. As an attorney. I practiced for over 20 years. I wasn't from the East Coast. I actually was born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska. But my family relocated back to the Washington area when I was graduating from high school. So I had my career back east. I was admitted to the bar in the District of Columbia and in Maryland. So I practiced law in the East Coast, in the DC, Maryland area for over 20 years. And I guess it's no secret that the law business, it can be a good business to be in. It pays, you can earn a good living as an attorney. So I was very fortunate. I worked hard and I had a decent law practice, a very active law practice for over 20 years. And it allowed me to retire a little bit early. So when I was in my 50s, I kind of phased out of my law work. I started phasing out. It took several years to phase out, but I started phasing out of my law work in Washington and did something that I had always wanted to do but never made time for, and that was travel. I traveled all over the world. I probably visited about 70 countries now. I've been to most of the major countries of the world and seen most of the major sites, like the pyramids and Machu Picchu and the Great Wall and all those kinds of things. So I've had the opportunity to do that. And I started doing that in my late 50s. Because I had followed a profession that provided the means and the independence to be able to do that. So I ultimately settled here in Arizona. My family was down in the Phoenix area, so I decided to settle out here. It was too hot down there. I came up to Prescott. But when I got here, for the first time, I realized that there were a lot of people who actually kind of agreed with some of my conservative values. I was a registered Republican in the state of Maryland for many years. But I could never be politically active because Maryland's a blue state. Washington, D.C. is one of the bluest jurisdictions in our country. There was really no point in trying to run for political office back there. I was a registered Republican. I voted. I went to party events. I contributed financially to candidates who I thought were worthwhile. But I never myself became a political activist. I was never a PC or anything like that back east. But when I settled here in Prescott, I realized that there were a lot of people around who kind of agreed with me. It was a very sympathetic community in terms of my politically conservative views, and I started getting politically active. I was 68 years old when I was first elected to the Arizona legislature. I was 70 when I got reelected in 2018. And I mention this for a reason. It's no secret to many of you in this room that I've taken some political hits. Been smeared, was forced to resign from the state legislature for reasons that I think are bogus. And I think when I tell my full story, that many of you will agree that this was bogus. It was largely a political hit, but I had some very powerful enemies, starting with Governor Ducey all the way down. And I mentioned this because I've paid a price for my political work, but it's a price I could afford to pay. I had already had my career, was already independent. There's really nothing they could do to me, So when I left the legislature, I just came home, took over Prescott E-News, put up a shingle for my law practice, and my life goes on. There's nothing anybody can do to shut me up or stop me. But that's not true for you. That's not true for all of you, especially the younger people. You need to understand that when you come to meetings like this, when you stand up for some of the principles that Rick talked about, that College Republicans United stands for, when you start championing conservative causes, you pay a terrible price. And maybe that's a price that you should not be paying at this stage of your life. Maybe there are other, better ways for you to be active and influential. We don't need martyrs. The most important thing that the younger people in this room can do is to get their education, get some financial independence through a business or a profession, and then they can get more outspoken and more active. We don't need martyrs, we need warriors. So I just hope you'll keep that in mind. I don't think anybody should urge anybody to stick their neck out and risk getting destroyed and silenced when they're in their 20s. Better to work through other candidates. Then maybe when you're their 30s and 40s and you have a little standing and a little independence, then maybe you can move on to being a candidate yourself or being more publicly outspoken. I want to say a word about Prescott E-News. when I came back, I had owned part of Prescott E-News for a number of years. It was founded long before I came to town. It was founded by somebody else. And it was a small digital publication. And I bought into it, I think around 2017. I wanted to have a voice. I wanted to write a column. And so I bought part of the publication and became a partner. And then after I did that, and I wrote a few columns, political people I work with, political advisors, quite frankly, told me, David, you can't do that. Everything you say, everything you write is going to be used against you. So I never did write the column. I was just a silent partner in Prescott E-News for a number of years. But when I came home from the legislature, I obviously was looking for something to do, some way to keep my voice in the community. So I took over Prescott E-News. I bought my partner out. I've run it for about the last 2.5, 3 years. I bought it specifically because I wanted Northern Arizona to have a conservative voice. We don't have that in any other media. You know, we have KYCA, we have some radio programs, we have some conservative people in this town who get on the radio and are able to write columns for the media, but we don't really have conservative media. So I took over Prescott E-News for the specific purpose of providing a platform for conservatives. And we now carry, I think we're the only outlet in Northern Arizona that carries Ann Coulter. I think she's on our digital platform today. Ann Coulter, the columnist. We carry John Stossel, the libertarian. We carry Rich Lowry. We carry Stephen Moore, who worked for the Heritage Foundation, worked in the Trump administration. Carry Michael Barone from the Washington Times. We carry a large number of conservative commentary. We also republish articles by Jared Taylor and Gregory Hood from American Renaissance. So we carry a wide variety of conservative, populist, nationalist kind of commentary in Prescott E-News. It is a digital platform. It is free, doesn't cost anything to access it. And I think we do some pretty good work. We have a recording studio where we bring in local political people running for public office. We had Paul Bossar's been in several times. Abe Hammond has been in. All of our local people have been in. And we record interviews in our local studio, and we publish these things and post these things to the internet, and you can access these things free of charge. So that's one of the things I'm doing to stay active and to continue to support conservative ideas here in Northern Arizona. Excuse me. We don't just carry conservative stuff, we also carry some mainstream stuff. We are a news service, so I have a subscription to the Associated Press. It's the same Associated Press. I see the same articles that are published in the Arizona Republic or in the Daily Courier up here, or any number of mainstream publications. I see all the articles that are coming off of the Associated Press feed, and it is getting harder and harder to find things that are fit to publish. I have yet to see any article from the Associated Press that treats Donald Trump fairly. He is constantly the bias in the press is obvious and palpable. And I look for articles that will treat Trump a little more fairly, and they're just not there. The Ukraine war, I have yet to see an article from the Associated Press. And the Associated Press is probably the most mainstream news service that we have in this country. I have yet to see an article on the Ukraine war that doesn't tell us that Ukraine is winning. Ukraine is winning the war. They just need a little more help, right? And if we don't give them a little more help, and they lose, then that's your fault, right? So that's the whole tenor of the journalism that we're getting from the mainstream media. All the more reason why we need publications like Prescott E-News. So I hope you'll check it out. It's free. PrescottEnews.com is our address. And it's there 24 hours a day. It doesn't cost a dime to read it. We post 10 news stories a day. We do it 7 days a week. So I hope you'll check us out. I recently did an article from the Associated Press on issues involving the U.S. Census. And it got me curious again about the census. I used to work for the Department of Commerce when I was a youngster right out of school. My first job was working for the U.S. Department of Justice, U.S. Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C. Within the Department of Commerce, I think they're still there, is the U.S. Census Bureau. So I was there for maybe a year and a half. I got acquainted with some of the staff of the U.S. Customs Service, and they gave me a copy of the 1970 U.S. Census. This would have been in the early 1970s. I was probably 22, 23 years old. The 1970 census would have been published in 71. So they gave me a copy of the U.S. Census report. Now, you know, if you've ever worked for the government, you know government work is pretty boring. So I actually had time to read this telephone book size copy of the U.S. Census report. And I began to notice some trends. Now, the 1970 census was the first census that was done after the 1965 Immigration Reform Act reforms of the Great Society. You may remember that the United States had a national origins policy for immigration, roughly from the early 1920s all the way up to 1965. So we restricted immigration to this country, frankly, to the founding stock. The system was very obviously and explicitly and deliberately biased towards Europeans. Remember now in our Constitution, what does it say? We're founding it for the benefits of democracy, benefits of freedom to ourselves and our posterity. America was not founded to be a multicultural or multiracial nation, right? So our first immigration law, I believe it was in 1795, restricted immigration to Europeans. And that's the way it's been in this country up until about 1965, when LBJ and the Great Society, they changed the immigration law to allow people in sort of a global policy. Underrepresented groups would be allowed in very large numbers. And restrictions were actually placed on European immigration. So the 1970 census was the first census that began to pick up this massive surge in third world immigration that took place in 66 and 67 and 68. So I became aware of this as a very young man. You know, I've talked a lot about it, gotten a lot of trouble as a political figure, but this is something I've been aware of for a very, very long time. And I could see, even in the early 1970s, when I was looking at this census, that if these trends continued, the differential immigration rates and the differential birth rates, that if these trends continued, in 50 years, this country would be majority non-white. Now, some of you will say, well, so what? Isn't that kind of just a racial thing? I mean, isn't everybody the same? You know, what difference does it make whether we're white or black or Asian or what have you? You know, everybody's the same, right? Well, that's not the lesson of history. The lesson of history is that there is never, in the entire history of the world, been a successful multicultural or multiracial nation. All nations that last are based on a homogeneous population. And the reason for that is that you have to have social consensus. To have a democracy, you have to have a high degree of agreement and consensus and social unity. I think Robert Putnam wrote a book about this, Bowling Alone, about the importance of social capital. So that's what's happened in this country, by the way, over the last few decades, is we've had a breakdown in social capital. We no longer have enough in common to live together peacefully without racial tension and conflict. So I became aware of this as a very young man in the 1970s because I could see it in the United States Census. And I could see that within 50 years, the trend lines would completely flip. And that's exactly what's happened. We don't hear this talked about in our mainstream media. But if you're a white guy, a white kid, under the age of 18, every white child in this country under the age of 18 is now a racial minority in the country that was founded by their ancestors. All right? So just carry that forward. I get criticized for this, but I don't care because I'm speaking the truth. I believe I'm speaking the truth. But you carry this forward 20 years. What is our military going to look like? What is our workforce going to look like? What is our school system going to look like? Are we all just going to end up one big happy family? There's really no evidence to suggest that, and there's no instance in history, there's no example in history where that's actually happened. Now, I've had this discussion with a lot of people, and I'm always happy to have the discussion because I think I can defend my position. And they say, well, what about Switzerland? Switzerland, you've got Germans, you've got French, you've got Italians. It's one of the most prosperous, stable countries in the world. And people who say that to me are usually people who've never been to Switzerland. Well, I've been to Switzerland many times. I've traveled all over Switzerland. I used to have clients who had business in Switzerland, and I used to go with them. So I know Switzerland very well. And the thing about Switzerland is it's got a super majority of Germans. About 60% of the population is German. And it's been that way for several hundred years. And then you have a population of about 20 some odd percent of French and about 12, 14% Italian. But these are very, very stable numbers that have been stable for many, many decades and actually for several hundred years. But the real thing is, and of course, many Swiss, they're bilingual. So language is not really a barrier to them. But the other point is that they're all Europeans. Okay, so they may be speaking French, they may be speaking Italian, they could be speaking German, but they're all the same people. You get on the train, and they all look the same. Some speak German, some speak French, but they look all the same. So they really do have, Switzerland really is a very homogeneous country. So Switzerland is not a very good example of successful multiculturalism. How about the Roman Empire? Now, the Roman Empire was around for a long time, and it was pretty successful. But how did they keep the Roman Empire together? Number one, not everybody could vote in the Roman Empire. You had to be a Roman. They restricted citizenship and they restricted the franchise. That's number one. Number two, it was an empire. They maintained the empire through force of arms. And that worked for several hundred years until it stopped working, right? And then what happened? Well, the Roman Empire broke up. You had the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire is not a good example of successful multiculturalism and multiracialism. It only existed through an authoritarian government and through the repression of people who were not Roman citizens. So my point is this, that the demographics of this country are changing. I made a speech in 2018 at the Republican Men's Forum downtown at the St. Michael's Hotel. And I talked about the changing demographics in Arizona's public school system. And I made the point, which apparently nobody knew. How they could not know it, I don't know. But I made the point that in Arizona, white kids were in the minority. The school system at that time was 60% non-white and 40% white. And I made a comment to the effect that, well, this complicates racial integration, because there aren't enough white kids to go around. And, 3 days later, Governor Ducey is calling for my resignation from the legislature as a racist. It happens to be true, by the way. That's a talk I gave in 2018. Would you like to know what the numbers are today, 2023? Well, now the white kids, you don't want to hear it, do you? The white kids are down to about 37% of the school system. Okay. So, and it's not going to change. Arizona is one of the states that has a majority of non-white births. Many states are at that point. Some states are ready to flip. So how do you think this is going to affect our ability to have social unity and political stability in this country? I think we're in trouble. Now, let me just close by saying, I think one of the greatest political slogans in history, at least in American history, probably since the New Deal. The New Deal was a great slogan, but the best political slogan in our lifetime is "Make America Great Again." Right? Make America great again. But think about what that means. Think about what "Make America Great Again" really means. It expresses a deep, deep nostalgia for a greatness we have lost. Implicit in the statement of Make America Great Again is a recognition that we're not great anymore. And somehow, that if we all work hard and we all sort of get over our denialism and that kind of thing, that maybe we can restore America. Maybe we can make America great again. I know many of you people probably want to believe that. I'm a Trump supporter. I've wanted to believe it. Unfortunately, I no longer can, because I know that the demographic trends in this country are irreversible. They are irreversible. So the question is no longer, can we save America? The only question is, can we save anything? Can we save anything? Because the people out there on the corner, the Antifa and the Black Lives Matter, they have an agenda. And you know what that agenda is? They're going to kill you and take everything you have. That's the agenda. They're going to kill you and take everything you have. So I'd love to make America great again, but I'm afraid we're past that tipping point. And the only thing we can do is try to save what we can, try to save some remnant of America. We've got white kids being born today into a country that's going to turn into South Africa in a matter of a few decades. So that's what the fight is all about. Now, I know I've probably offended some people in this room, and you think maybe I'm an extremist. When Governor Ducey and Jonathan Lyons, some of you may not know who Jonathan Lyons was, he was the head of the Republican Party a few years ago. When they started calling me, Ducey didn't call me, but he had people call me. Lyons did call me. Karen Fan, a number of people told me to get out of the race. You're embarrassing Republicans. You're hurting us. Get out of the race. Well, I refused. I refused to get out of the race. That was the 2018 election. And I was the second highest vote getter in the state of Arizona for a legislative seat that year. So that just, where are the people do understand. I have been to literally thousands of homes in Yavapai County polling and dropping literature and knocking on doors and talking to voters. And I asked them, what is the number one issue to you? Crime? Water? Growth? No, immigration. Immigration is always the number one issue. So I'm going to close now. I see that I'm getting the hook, the proverbial hook, and I've said a lot this morning, maybe more than I intended to and more than I should have. But I think it's important that we focus on really where we are as a country and what the issues are before us. We've got a big fight on our hands. I will do everything in my power to help College Republicans United and any other organization like that who's willing to make this fight. I wish you well. God bless you. Thank you for I'm going to introduce the next group. It's the Lions of Liberty. That's a political religious group, and they've been instrumental in helping us put on this event today. And I'd like to introduce, all right, it's coming down to the podium now. We have the Solano brothers, Luke and Nick Solano. Thank you very much, and thank you again for having me.